what we're announcing today, our climate action plan. And so if there are, sometimes when we talk about climate and Earth Day and things, there are great scientific questions. And there are lots of people here who can answer those. So depending on the Q&A, we will, if folks are interested, if I say something wrong, you can tell me and correct it, is also what I'm saying. Okay, so I think with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So I think first and foremost, want to say Happy Earth Day to everyone in Albuquerque and, of course, central New Mexico. And this day ebbs and flows in terms of how much folks pay attention to it. But it really shouldn't, because it is one of those days that is a special day for us to reflect on all things environment, ecology, and climate, because it's such a long-term global issue. It's one of the few topics that truly unites us all. And so that's really what we're going to focus on today, with essentially, I think, one big step forward for the city of Albuquerque. And we're going to hear from some folks who've been heavily involved in this, and I'll introduce them when it's time for them to come up. But also fitting, it's a beautiful day in Albuquerque, and we're, of course, at our open space center right in the heart of the West Side Bosque. And the New Mexico spring snow is blowing a little bit, the cotton from the cottonwoods. And so this is, just a special place for us to live, but also a special place for us to reflect on things like climate change. So that's what we're going to talk about here today. Now, we know that, of course, the beauty of Albuquerque is a big part of what makes this city such a special place to live. And, I was lucky to be born and raised here and grow up with, sunsets on the Sandias and play in our local parks and foothills, and am now passing those traditions on to my own kids. In fact, this facility, which is now open in COVID-safe different ways, is awesome. And I'm a frequent visitor out here with my kids. And this is also our closest version to Bosque del Apache. So in the winter, you can come out here and you can see all the cranes and all sorts of things. So this is a visual location, but we want to focus, I think, at a bit higher level today in terms of our city's efforts to protect our natural resources and to pass on a legacy of that to future generations and leave Albuquerque cleaner and healthier than when we found it. That has always been one of our top priorities. Now, I want to touch base on some of the efforts that we've done in the last 3 years when it comes to sustainability and climate change. And as a whole, there are even different magazines and rankings of this. And the short story is we used to be in the bottom of the list, and now we're at the top of the list in almost every category. And that is a really good thing. And I'll touch on some of the reasons why. I think it was Earth Day or around Earth Day when I first took office. We were right here and we signed the Paris Climate Agreement, which, believe it or not, was controversial for some reason, but now much less so. And so we started with that 3 years ago. And we also put 38 solar projects on city-owned buildings. And we created our actual division of energy and sustainable management. And this is kind of a cross-cutting division that's really part of our municipal development office, but also has to do with environmental health and aviation and everything in between. And so they've been really coordinating the built infrastructure to bring more energy efficiency and sustainability to our city. We also upgraded, of course, our energy building codes for energy efficiency, which was a big effort that was actually led by council that we completed this year. We won the Bloomberg American Cities Climate Change Challenge with funding for our sustainability efforts. And we also, of course, partnered with P&M on the Solar Direct project. And this is something that we really kind of rolled out during the pandemic, and a lot of folks still don't know about. But out in the Jicarilla Apache Reservation, that direction, about 200 miles, there is a huge piece of land that is going to provide 80% of the renewable energy for the city's use right here in Albuquerque. And it's kind of a fun fact, Silver City is the other city involved in that project too. So we kind of have a partner with us in that, in Silver City down south. And when you put all of this together, we are on track, more or less, to be 100% renewable energy in terms of city government by 2025. That is moved way up from, I think, the initial projection of 2045. So in the last 3 years, we've gained 20 years when it comes to sustainability. So this Earth Day, we've taken a next step and re-updated our city's climate action plan. And does anyone remember the last, because we had one before, Since 2009, so 11 years in the making, we now have the 2021 Climate Change Action Plan. And this was literally a community effort from all the folks behind me to put this together. And so we're going to talk about some of the details in that process in here. But Albuquerque is fortunate to now have an upgraded plan that is relevant in these times, which obviously a 2009 plan was not. It was out of date a couple of years after it was done and never updated. So another area in which we are catching up. I also want to mention that as part of this plan, I think a newer trend that should have been there all along, but is now part of this plan, is a heavy emphasis on equity. And there are lots of sort of examples of how this plays out in our community. I want to highlight just a few. One is the connection between public transit and the reduced emissions from cars, the reduced carbon output, and also the manufacturing in terms of what happens to go into making cars. The less cars that are on the road mean a whole lot of things when it comes to reducing our carbon footprint. But right here, we're doing this by trying to make transit more equitable. And whether you like it or not, the ART project was actually a huge step in that direction. But our administration's extension of the ART project out to the west side has been a much, much bigger impact because of the amount of miles traveled. And that really serves as a way for commuters to C&M and UNM. And so this has been our mark on transit equity, is expanding the ART project out to the west side and Cottonwood Mall and looping it over to our universities. Now, also with that, of course, transitioning our fleet. So we're transitioning our fleet to electric vehicles as they're phased out, and our first electric bus is in testing right now, and we're going to be starting to phase those in at the end of the year over the next 10 years. So these are some areas in which we're connecting that, but also we increase connectivity in the transit system. That means less people have to drive, and usually the areas where this is the biggest issue happens to be our low-income communities of color. And so that's how we're connecting essentially climate change to transit equity. There's also areas that we have now well documented. For example, the heat island issues that are occurring, again, some of our lower income, older neighborhoods, communities of color, where the temperature is actually 2 to 4 degrees higher than it was 10 years ago because of the loss of the tree canopy. And so that's why our administration is emphasizing all of our replantings to be in these communities that typically have not had or they have lost that tree canopy. And so that does equate to literal things like not having to use your air conditioner as much, which actually lowers your electricity bill, which of course, if you're on a tighter budget, a fixed income budget, that bill is a much higher percentage. So I know it gets a little sort of complicated, but I think part of what we try and do on Earth Day is connect those dots, because there is a direct correlation to equity issues and climate change. Now, two other examples that are less equity driven, but I always like to share because we can see them right here in Albuquerque. And one is the Rio Grande behind me, and everyone asks, like, how come there's no water? Well, if you really track it back, it does have to do with climate change. For one, down south, the crops require more irrigation because it's hotter. And if you look up north, there's less snowpack because it's hotter, and so there's less flow in the Rio Grande. So again, you see that cycle that is unfortunately being negatively impacted by climate change. Now, the other one that I always have to explain to my kids when we drive and enjoy all the great places in rural New Mexico is, why are all the pinon trees dying? Well, we know, of course, there's a lot of science behind this, but some of the science is because of the bark beetle. And the ability for the bark beetle to attack some of our native trees is correlated to the rise in temperature. And so that's why you see those impacts as you get north. They keep creeping up north because the temperature keeps allowing them to essentially take advantage of those trees because it's not as cold. So anyway, there's other things too, like you can see the Sonoran Desert now. I remember when I used to drive to Elephant Butte, you could literally see where that desert starts. And it used to be outside of Socorro, and now it's outside of Belen. These are literally things I've seen in my lifetime that are a reflection of that increase in temperature. So anyway, there's lots of other examples, obviously, nationally and internationally, but I think those are three that we see right here in and around Albuquerque. So I want to talk more about our approach to help on the front line with communities that are harmed by environmental injustice and who also, as some of the examples I mentioned, bear the worst impacts of climate change. And so to do that is Kelsey Rader, she is our city's Chief Sustainability Officer. This was another improvement. We said our city actually has to invest in the people and the positions and give them the power to actually help when it comes to climate change. And those are manifest in the position of the Chief Sustainability Officer and the person, Kelsey Rader. Kelsey.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much to Mayor Keller. I'm incredibly grateful to serve with Mayor Keller. He's, again, as you mentioned, created the Sustainability Office, which has really centralized the city's response to climate change. And as a part of that, we've been able to really spearhead this effort to update the city's climate action plan for the first time in over a decade. This is a really significant action, specifically because of the driving factor of its rootedness in community. This plan is built on over 3,000 survey responses and responded to 600 public comments. We had 19 community members drive this plan. City's role was to make sure that climate action folks were able to really articulate the needs of Albuquerque's communities across the city and ensure that this plan was reflective of people's lived experiences. The result is that we have developed 50 strategies that cover transportation, building emissions, economic development, and more. From supporting local food production to transitioning public transit to clean fuels, this plan looks at the human and environmental impacts of climate change as a whole and points us to where we need to go. This plan was made by community to mobilize actions by members of the public, organizations, and institutions across Albuquerque. Everyone has a role to play in this plan, and we're excited as the Sustainability Office to make sure that we are able to monitor, support, and help to implement the actions articulated in this plan. Thank you again to our task force members. For the last 10 months, they have worked tirelessly and connected with their communities again to ensure that this plan is really going to articulate the future for our city for years to come. Equity is again in the driver's seat, and we are so thankful to be able to release this plan again today. Thank you.
Okay, and at the city level, there are many departments involved in our sustainability efforts that really Kelsey helps coordinate. But there's kind of one out front by definition, and that is, of course, our environmental health department. And so to talk more about this, our Director of Environmental Health, Ryan Mast. Ryan?
Thank you, sir. As Mayor mentioned, Albuquerque has had a lot of sustainability wins under his leadership, and a core tenet of the future growth of the city, and in fact, a key element of why my family was attracted here is his vision and efforts that he's put in place. But we collectively know that there's a lot more work to do. This plan that we are formally launching today builds upon the success the city has already had thus far and lays out a roadmap for a healthier future in Albuquerque. This climate action plan is the outcome of bringing together the best local experts and advocates to identify those actions that are most relevant and important to our communities. And the process that we use will serve as a model to cities across the country and, of course, in fact, the world on how to ensure the voices of those who are most impacted by climate change are leading the discussion on how to combat it. Introducing a climate action plan right now is so critically necessary. And we did this not just in spite of the pandemic, but because we knew that it would be so important to prepare to begin implementation in its wake, to help ensure a more green and just recovery. We have a long way to go to undo historic environmental injustice, especially in communities of color. And this plan is a step toward the future where we are leaving a better, more equitable Albuquerque for all. A critical component of the Climate Action Plan's goals, method, and success is its rootedness in community. So I want to thank New Mexico First for their important work as facilitators throughout this lengthy planning process. And I think we all owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to all the great task force members for their recommendations and representing their communities in a very bold way. Based off of the results of the citywide survey and later task force consensus, the plan that we're announcing today, the policy recommendations contained therein, are organized under 7 core themes, including sustainable buildings, renewable energy, clean transportation, waste and recycling, economic development, education and awareness, and finally, climate-conscious neighborhoods and resources. Together, the updated 2021 strategies present a focused, actionable pathway to fulfilling of the vision of a more sustainable and equitable Albuquerque with opportunities for engagement for all members of the greater community. Finally, I'd be remiss to not thank all of the great city staff that have worked on this throughout the process to ensure that we were able to deliver such a meaningful plan for the future of the city of Albuquerque. And these include Kelsey, Sydney, Alice, Natalie, Safe, Maya, Agnetica, Ann, Lauren, and so many more from all the departments of the city that contributed to this great plan that we're launching today. The approach that we took is the best recognizable way, and we're leading by example to make sure that our community's voices are heard on this very important issue. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you, Mayor, for your leadership on this issue.
Thank you so much, Director Mast. And yeah, he was one of our great lures. And as he shared, I will just validate that it was really the city that brought him here, meaning how beautiful this is and such a great place to live. But also the community's dedication to all things environment. So not to mention mountain biking trails. But anyway, that's for a different press conference. All right, so now let's hear, we really wanted to have so many people share their experience from the task force. But I think we decided just kind of for expediency that Teresa Cardenas was going to kind of represent them all. So she's a task force member. Teresa, come on up.
Thank you, Mayor. So through outreach, civic engagement, and leadership, we as a task force, and there were about 19 of us, have collectively contributed to the Climate Action Plan as a sustainable pathway forward that is inclusive, addresses equity, and communities most affected by climate change. We met over a number of weeks, seems like months, working in groups to develop strategies to help Albuquerque become a lot more resilient and really confront a number of climate challenges that we have. And one of them is equity in areas of the city that are most vulnerable. The process was comprehensive and inclusive of many strategies that would set the city's new climate policy plan. Our task force meetings were open to the public, and nearing the final process, we asked the public to help us prioritize the many strategies that we had come up with that could actually be implemented. As a task force member, I thought each member put forth the best of their expertise and commitment to equity as they represented each one of their communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I think what we're going to do at this point is, again, I'd love to have other folks share stories if they want, etc. But maybe we'll take some questions. But volunteer if you're a better person to answer than me. So, are there any questions?
Yeah, let's start out and see if we have any questions in person today first.
Yeah, I just want to see if you can talk about the plastic bag ban. Is that something that's working to your plan? Because I know some stores are allowing personal bags back. So is that something that you'll be forcing again?
Yeah, sure. So I'm happy to answer that question. I have to laugh because the first question was not about the climate report, but fair. It's always fair. So, okay, well, look, with respect to the bag ban, here's what we're going to do. Through the emergency order, it's on hold. In other words, we're not enforcing that, and that's been this way through the pandemic. And we know that should at least stay until the pandemic is sort of over, and we don't really know when or how that will be defined. So we're going to reevaluate the bag ban and how it'll be implemented when the pandemic's over. So roughly, I think we'll work with council and we'll kind of pick this up probably in August. So there's no rush. But the short story is we want to continue our commitment certainly to reduce all the plastic bags, but we also might have to have some ways for grocers and so forth to maybe require people to pack their own groceries if they bring their own bag and that kind of thing. So we'll maybe have some minor tweaks, but until the pandemic's over, it is on hold.
All right, any other questions in person or move to Zoom? All right, we just got a question from Brittany Costello at KOB. She's wondering, how much has been spent on these efforts since Mayor Keller got to office? Is there a goal, a study on how much it will take to pursue those efforts?
Thanks so much for that question. And the question is about, how much we've invested in terms of our sustainability efforts and what is sort of the goal going forward. So I can answer that at a high level and say that we've used Krebs bonds. These are federal bonds to pay for a lot of the solar panel work. And our partnership with P&M has to do with paying off the solar panels over time. So the actual cost we can certainly get to on, but it's not really a cost to taxpayers because we're paying it off over time. And in terms of the goal, again, originally we were supposed to be 100% renewable or sustainable by 2045. And our administration decided on our own to move that up to 2025, which obviously is just 4 years from now. So the goal is to be 100% by 2025. But with more details on this, Kelsey or Ryan, spending or safe? Anyone off the top of your head? Hickory project?
To be done by September this year.
Hickory project should be done by September of this year. Remember how much it cost?
As a part of the Hickory project, we've negotiated favorable contract terms to make sure that we are also getting a credit deduction for any sort of
Ooh, why don't you
oil
come
and
explain?
gas
That's good.
activity.
We'll have Kelsey explain that.
Sorry, I'm a bit sniffly from the pollen. So as a part of the Solar Direct program, we were also able to negotiate favorable terms to ensure that we had an oil and gas deduction on our final bill. And so the cost of the solar is actually an incredibly competitive price. We're looking at approximately 2 cents per kilowatt hour. And essentially, any oil and gas related operations that happen on the P&M grid are deducted from our overall bill at the end of the month. And so, in the event that we have high oil and gas prices across the country, we could actually potentially see cost savings on Solar Direct net savings.
Any others?
Yep, we got a question from Jessica Dyer at the Journal. Are there similarities to the 2009 Climate Action Plan? What is the timetable for implementing the recommendations? Does the mayor's budget have any funding specifically for carrying out Climate Action Plan objectives?
So this is a perfect one for our experts. So we'll start with Kelsey. And I would just say, too, we're going to put a link. The report is actually being released today. So you can also find that information in the report.
I'm sorry, Maya, there was a couple different questions in there, so I'll start from the first one.
Are there any similarities to the 2009 Climate Action Plan?
Yes, when we first decided to develop this plan, we really tried to look at all the subject areas that were covered in the 2009 plan and really try to replicate that subject matter as much as possible in this plan. So really focusing on those heavy hitters of emissions producing activities, building energy usage, renewable energy, and transportation being the top three of those, as well as waste and recycling efforts, et cetera. And so, in addition to that, I think our process is relatively different. At this time around for the 2021 plan, we wanted to make sure that community was the driver and that community members were really driving the development of the strategies. And the city's role was to be an advisor to answer questions when asked, but to really support and uplift community voices.
And the last couple questions there are, what's the timeline for implementing these recommendations and any specific funding for carrying out these objectives?
So I'm very excited to say that with the support of Mayor Keller, in addition to his efforts to support elevating a energy and sustainability division, which will help with the implementation of this plan, the Sustainability Office is also pursuing efforts to expand as well. So there's definitely been funding already been put in place in last year's budget and this year's budget to really expand out the staffing efforts of those folks who are really going to drive and support implementation. In addition to that, the timeline is going to be different depending on actions. The task force did an incredible job of really assessing all the different strategies specifically to see those that would be implemented in the near term, midterm, and long term. And so it will be dependent upon the partners that we engage with who will help to carry out the implementation of this plan, and that will determine a lot of the timeline of when actions are completed.
All right, any others?
That's it on Zoom.
Okay, we had another guest coming, but it's not going to work out. So just explaining why I'm texting. All right. Well, I think I would just say this also. Remember, every year in our CIP budget, there is a set aside for energy efficiency. And is it 2% or 3? There's 3% for energy efficiency. So a lot of these efforts are consolidated into the CIP package that comes down. And there's even small things like our lights are now LED as opposed to the soda lights and things like that. So that all gets weaved into the CIP work as well. All right, with that, everybody, happy Earth Day, and thank you so much to the community for all the work on this. We really appreciate it on behalf of the city and all our future Burqueños who are going to benefit from this too. Thank you.